In this lecture, we're going to be learning about adjustment layers. So depending on your software, your adjustment layers will be found in different areas, but they should all have these general adjustment layers. So the first one we're going to go over is brightness and contrast. So in Photoshop, if I come over here or if I come up to window, I can select my adjustments and bring that window up. And so I'm going to go to brightness and contrast first, and you can see it adds a layer down here in my layer tray called brightness and contrast. And up here I have my controls for it. And so what this does is I can brighten my image. So if I pull it up like that, you can see it almost just basically takes every color and it just brightens it. It almost adds just a layer of white on top of it, but it also keeps the same saturation. So it doesn't necessarily remove the saturation from the colors. It just brightens them. And then my contrast, I can turn the contrast up so my darks will get darker, my lights will get lighter, but they will also too keep their same contrast. Or actually I think the contrast goes up on the color. So everything goes up in contrast, the color and the values. All right, let's go ahead and delete that layer. Then our next one is going to be levels. So you can see right here that we have our levels and we have these different sliders that we can grab. So if I grab right there, you can see I can grab my mid-tone colors. I can grab my darkest colors and I can grab my lightest colors and I can move those around and adjust them. Now right now we have this set to RGB. So red, green, and blue, but I can just control just one aspect. So you can see if I change it to red, I can drag this over and just adjust my red dark values. And then I can just adjust my red highlights. So you can play around with this. There's all different types of things you can do in here. Let's try a different color. We can do blue, move that around. So it's a pretty cool, nifty little tool. Let's go ahead and trash this layer. Next is going to be hue and saturation. So you can see that we have three different options for this layer. The first thing we can control are the hues. So we can drag this around and it'll basically change the color of every single color that we have in our image. Bring that back to 0. Then we can also control our saturation. So we can drag this upwards and it just saturates all of our colors, basically just bringing them more towards this side where it's more saturated. Or we can desaturate them. So if we want them to be less saturated, we can bring them that way, or we can completely desaturate it into black and white. Then we also have lightness. So we can go ahead and bring up the lightness. Now this is different than the lightness on the contrast. This lightness basically just adds a layer of white on top of it and makes it more transparent or less transparent, rather than just lightening each color, but keeping the saturation. This slowly gets rid of that saturation and turns it to white. Now a really cool thing about the hue and saturation controls is that I can come up here where it says master and I can change that to any color I want and I can individually control those colors. So for example, let's say we wanted to remove some of the yellow out of this image. Let's say we thought the yellow was too bright, too saturated. What we could do is we could select yellow and then drag that saturation down. You can see that I can really remove a lot of that yellow. So now there's no yellow interface if I drag it all the way over there, or I can really saturate that up. We could even change the color of it. If we get too far away, it starts to get a little crazy looking, but if we move it just a little bit that way or a little bit that way, you can see we can kind of control the hue of the yellow. And we can also brighten the yellow or we can bring it down. So we can control each individual color in here if we want. And that's really useful, especially if you want to do things like if you painted something like, let's say you painted somebody's teeth and you think they look too yellow, rather than repainting them, you can just kind of remove the yellow out of your image or just block out the teeth and then remove the yellow out of that area. Let's go ahead and drag this down and trash it. All right, next, let's go over color balance. So let's go ahead and select that. So you can see that with color balance, you can basically control the balance between kind of basically complementary colors. So I can go more towards the cyan color, or I can go more towards the red. And it just kind of, you can balance those warm and cool colors. Same with the magenta and the green, and same with the yellow and the blue. So it's basically just adjusting those colors in your image. All right, so play around with that. That's also a really cool tool. You can really manipulate the way your photograph or your painting looks. Then lastly, let's go ahead and look at inverting. So right here I have my inverting layer, and you can see that it basically just takes all my colors, all my values, and inverts them. So all my light areas become dark and all my dark areas become light. And if I have a warmer area, it becomes cool. And so this is what we get. Now, you might not always want to be using this. There are times that you might want to use this. For example, if we had painted her hair on a different layer, I could invert that layer. So I kind of did a little example right here. So you can see that this layer right here where I have erased out everywhere except for her hair. So it's only inverting her hair area, and it makes her hair just look like it's white and maybe glowing a little bit or something like that. It's something that you can just kind of play around on different layers. This would look a lot better if you actually painted this on a separate layer, because then it would only be getting the hair painting part of it, but you get the idea of it. All right, that brings us to the end of this lecture. So go ahead and play around with these different adjustment layers and see what you can accomplish with it. I'll see you guys in the next lecture.